Hi, Lou here to talk about a category that dominates tabletop gaming because of Magic the Gathering, Special Powers card games. I don't know of a better name for this, so this is what I'm going to call it, Special Powers card games. Games consisting almost entirely or entirely of cards that have special powers that are exceptions to the standard rules. In fact, often these games are nothing but exceptions, it seems. Now, the outstanding characteristic of Magic the Gathering is the invention of pay-to-win games via purchasing of functional components, in this case more collectible cards. It's a common model now in F2P free-to-play video games, but Magic may also be the origin of Special Powers card games. I don't know. In most hobby games, when you use cards, they are exceptions to the rules, but they don't dominate the game. There's more to the game. Pieces, often a board, lots of rules. In special purpose card games, there's practically nothing but the cards. Of course, you have to have something to keep score as well in Magic, and that's the only other thing. Players are important in any opposed game, as opposed to a parallel competition or single player game where you don't really have human-style opposition. And some Magic players have been successful even in formats where you don't use player-made decks, pre-made from the cards that the player has. Nonetheless, I think we can differentiate special purpose card games from other games that use cards in this way. In SPCG, the focus is on the cards. In games that use cards, such as event cards, along with other things, the focus is usually on the players. Now, I'm not saying players don't matter, but people with collectible card games spend a lot of time figuring out the optimum deck. A lot of time outside play of the normal game. And if you figure out a better optimum deck than somebody else, then you have a big advantage. That is quite different from normal games where you can't gain an advantage outside of the normal play of the game. Another characteristic of SPCG is that there are usually strong combos. That is, ways to play several cards in succession where the whole is greater than the sum of the individual cards. They sort of reinforce each other. The cards are effectively buffing other cards, to use the video game term. Often players will spend time outside actual play trying to think of especially effective combos because that helps them build more effective decks. Now, the SPCG style is attractive to novice designers, and I often encounter novice designers who make this kind of game. It's partly because they've played Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic as they grew up. It's also because it's easy to get this kind of game to a playable state, and it's easier to design two-player games, which most SPCG are, than to design multiplayer games. Also, you don't have to take into account maneuver. You don't have to take into account reality, because these games tend to be abstract, regardless of the gloss or atmosphere that's put on top. You just make up some powers, assign them to cards, and go, assuming you can figure out an objective. Now, something in between here is living card games, which I believe is a term actually trademarked by Fantasy Flight Games. It represents SPCG that are not collectible in the sense of Magic, but where there are additional decks that you can buy. You don't have an obligation to do so to keep up with the Joneses, but each individual deck offers different options and more variety to the game, and so people may be interested in buying those additional decks. This is the kind of game you should consider designing rather than a collectible one. Why not a collectible game? Well, you need millions of dollars to get a CCG started, though it's probably cheaper for the video version. because you have to give away lots of sets to get things going, and you have to provide organized play, which is tournaments with prizes. And all that costs a lot of money up front, especially when you're competing with Magic, Hearthstone, the video game, and others. Many years ago, I heard a CCG designer suggest that more than 500 collectible card games had been published. But then, and today, only a few had succeeded for long. Magic made tons of money for shop owners when it came out, and it still does. But why would a shop owner risk dealing with a new one? They might end up with a lot of inventory that they'll be stuck with and can't sell. Why not just sell Magic? So shop owners stick with Magic. And that means it's hard to get another collectible card game going unless perhaps you're one of the big industry players to start with. And if you're a big industry player to start with, you will choose somebody to design your game based on, most likely, a particular IP, intellectual property. You won't have some freelancer come to you with a game and they'll decide to turn it into their big CCG. Another aspect of SPCGs that I want to mention is resources. Yu-Gi-Oh! Does not have resources, which is a constraint. Magic requires you to have lands to power your spells. And I am told that this makes Magic a more skilled game. It certainly appears to me that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is primarily a game played by kids, minors, rather than by adults. Now I have to admit I dislike this style for several reasons. It's abstract, there are too many symbols on the cards, it just doesn't feel right. And I'm also not into two-player games these days, but it's very popular, especially for two-player games. Thanks for listening.